time once again for Community Forum, and we are very lucky to have back with us live in the studios this morning, Fred Felleman. Fred Felleman is a commissioner at the Port of Seattle. Since 1988, he has served as an environmental consultant to local and national marine conservation organizations, as well as to local tribal governments. In that capacity, he played leadership roles in the establishment of the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary, the Nia Bay Emergency Response Tug, the Cherry Point Aquatic Reserve, and the listing of the southern resident killer whale population under the Endangered Species Act. And he is just wrapping up his first year as one of 5 commissioners at the Port of Seattle. Fred, thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us again this morning.
Well, thanks, Mike, for giving me another chance.
So start out, talk about your role now at the port and developments over the last year.
Well, thanks again. I am, got elected to be the environmental candidate at the port on the heels of the Shell rig controversy, but my interest in the port, expands well beyond the environment. But it's really important if the port's, century agenda goal is to be the cleanest, greenest port in the nation, that having an environmental professional on board the commission shouldn't be that, surprising. And in fact, one of the great, trepidations I had potentially was the, how well I'd work with the other commissioners, because I didn't want to be just one vote of 5. And it turned out to be really as good as I could have hoped. We have a very like-minded team on the commission, very civically oriented, and we don't really have a lot of, contention, and almost all our votes are unanimous because if we work things out. And so I've been, really pretty delighted by that. And so bringing up environmental initiatives is not met with resistance. So, upon arrival, I had a resolution to pass the Energy and Sustainability Committee that Commissioner Courtney Gregoire, is co-chairs with me. And, upon arrival, people wanted me to, sign, commitments, and never shall there be any, fossil fuel projects at the port, or, thou shalt stop all these things. And, I didn't come to the port to stop port operations. I came to make them better. And we haven't had any major fossil fuel projects. And I think they haven't been proposed because they knew they'd be up against somewhat of a buzzsaw of concern. But the idea that the port should take responsibility for its greenhouse gas contributions and do everything in its power to reduce them, because we run a big, smelly operation. I mean, it's not like we are, planting daisies. So, never used that expression before. But there are ways to do things better than just, it's not just to promote growth, it's to manage growth. This area is exploding. We need to do things that are, making jobs, and, jobs that are, not just, it's like the analogy with the sea. It has, rising tide has to float all boats, and that's one of the things that really encouraged me about being able to help keep the economy here diversified. Not just tech people, and you can get real work, real money to afford yourself to be able to live in the city without having to have a PhD. That was really kind of intriguing. I've been living in Ballard for over 20 years. And, this little sleepy village now that has, an apartment problem, and the ability to retain industrial land so the port can be a port, and so folks can make a living in the full diverse ways that the port can contribute. And then, also there's, again, our operations have impacts around surrounding communities, and we have to cop to that and do our best to, minimize our impacts at first and then mitigate those that we can avoid. And so, we have these projects like Terminal 5, where Shell was moored, biggest, most efficient potential seaport on the West Coast, or terminal. And it's going to take several $100 million to get it big ship ready. That's, the term of art. And then we have this, multi-billion-dollar project over at the airport. And we have a sustainable airport master plan. Again, how sustainable is all about, putting in the measures up front, and trying to get airlines to burn biofuel. The surrounding communities get all these, diesel particulate and other impacts, like the folks down in, Soto and these neighborhoods from the trucks. So there's really, one of the funny things, like, when I campaigned, I said, well, I have this agenda. I want to get X, Y, and Z done. But what you really want is somebody in office that will think civic-mindedly when things that you had no intention to bring up, come to you. That fact of the matter is, we only have so much control over what goes on in the world, right? And things like the Hanjin shipping line going bankrupt when we're trying to, fight off the arena from clogging up our access to a terminal. And here we are, at Seattle Center, where we'd love to see, Key get redeveloped. And so, these things. And the first thing I had to deal with was the question of, whether Uber is going to get to the airport, of all the things that I was expecting not to deal with, and that was one of them. But it was like, this kind of learning curve that, I knew coming into the port that I knew a lot, but I knew what I didn't know. And I wanted to learn, so this, keeps you young, although I've been graying faster than than previously. It's a time and a half job, and they pay you half time. So you also have to run another gig to survive. And that perhaps is my only frustration about, being a commissioner. If I could do it full time, I'd be rocking it, but anyway, so I'm trying to do my best. And then, in addition to having these 5 commissioners, including myself, at the Port of Seattle, we have this, joint venture with the Port of Tacoma called the Northwest Seaport Alliance. And just as we're trying to get public awareness that we have ports in our backyard, no less elected port officials, we now are looking at the seaports as one unit. And so we have the North Harbor, which is Seattle, and the South Harbor, which is Tacoma, just to keep you confused. But this was an alliance that people have talked about for a long time because we were, competing with each other within the state of Washington. And so rather than it being a marriage of love, it was really much more of a shotgun marriage with the Port of Vancouver being the justice of the peace. The Port of Vancouver really was eating our lunch for, the share of trade and containers and all that. And so it was like, if we don't get our act together, we're just going to lose the benefits of the, longshore and all the other folks that make things work on the waterfront. And we're, combined like the 3rd largest container port in the country in the U.S. Seattle, Tacoma is 3rd to New York, New Jersey to L.A. Long Beach, which leads. But when you look at Seattle, Tacoma, in addition to Vancouver, which is the largest port in Canada, we're even elevated to a number 2 slot. So it's formidable. And we have this huge waterway that we love to refer to as the Sailor Sea. And, those ships go across the dotted line all the time. And so it's a real challenge, management of Sailor Sea. That's what I, ever since Exxon Valdez in 89, even previous, I've been like concerned about vessel traffic. So here in one sense, I'm encouraging growth. At the same time, I'm continuing to advocate for safety with my other hat on. And so it's, it's not a conflict of interest. Actually, as far as I'm concerned, knowing the trade allows you to make, meaningful, appropriate measures to address it. And for the most part, we're really not so much seeking additional ships. Everything's all about being big ship ready. And so, in fact, a large ship at a terminal was, equivalent to having 2 little ones. And when you think about all the other impacts, the more modern ships give you a chance to plug them in when they're idling, instead of idling at the dock. And we're really trying to make sure that at Terminal 5, that's required. Not all ships are there yet, but we're going to try to do our best to encourage that behavior. There are other things, now we're talking about the noise of ships underwater, which is like the latest thing that Port hasn't quite gotten to yet, but we're part of this Green Marine organization that certifies ships as having these environmental qualities that we then deduct their berthing fees to encourage the better ships to come in. So there are things the port can do that in the course of promoting economic development, we can also be doing this environmental sustainability issues. The airport, is having a really disproportionate impact on the surrounding communities at SeaTac. And, I live in Ballard, you hear the planes, folks in Beacon Hill are all, it's kind of hard to contain airplane impacts. And then, with the, the GPS landing system, which next gen, it's actually, sort of narrowing the flight path. So more, fewer people are getting more impacts, so it's like, and so there's really an equity issue there. And I don't blame these folks at all for concern, and we're looking at ways in which we can address that. Newer planes are quieter, burning, biofuel in the future. Hopefully the air quality issues are, but taking responsibility with legislation right now to increase the air quality monitoring. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the port should be able to withstand scrutiny and do it right. And so, but you got to have the data. So like your last speaker, we're not a data-free decision makers, and we're not matters over mind. We want to have our being mindful up front, and but a lot of that has to do with monitoring and ongoing stuff, which as a bit of a nerd I'm into, and so so again that sort of trying to take responsibility, and then the fact of the matter, unlike a lot of ports, where the Seaport is like tucked right into the city, and so our impact on the population, on traffic, are things that we have to take seriously, because ultimately you can get all the permits to develop all you want, but it's ultimately the social license to be a port in a burgeoning city that is the ultimate permit you need. And because the industrial lands are now incredibly valuable, people want to build condominiums on terminals like 46, arenas in the mouth of the terminal. Fortunately, that was one of the really tour de force moments in my first year, when the new city council supported us in opposing something as popular as a new basketball stadium arena, in acknowledgement that the port provides these important services to the area. But we have to take responsibility. Like Terminal 5 has the trains on the dock, so instead of having drayage trucks running back and forth, 1,000 of them potentially a day, you can have the trains be loaded directly and get them out of Dodge. And in fact, we have one of these competitive advantages we have. We have glacially carved straits, so we can float the bigger ships. But it's that last mile, getting it through town, and a lot of our stuff is bound to Chicago. So, and quite frankly, a lot of that fossil fuel development you might have heard of, the oil and coal trains, I mean, they were congesting the lines. Now, BNSF has made a lot of track improvements, and the trade is down for coal, and oil is still there. But this, as we hope that that investment will then facilitate us getting cherries to the market and more valuable things like that, less impactful things. So I think going further, this energy sustainability committee, I think quickly, we had these subcommittees that were from around the region, that a lot of agencies and public input trying to get the port to have like a new screening. If a new project comes up, rather than banning all projects, we will say, well, what's the greater impact? Not just how much does it cost, but is there the social equity? Is it disproportionately impactful? How much greenhouse gas can it reduce? Effects on public health, these sort of things, and of course the economic development aspects of it. So when staff comes to the commission for approval of some mega project, they're not just telling us this is the one that penciled out. We can make a determination as a public agency. Is it worth to go that extra mile to be able to get it done in a way that is less impactful? And, unless these projects are given unless we're given a alternatives to choose from, we don't even have a chance to be good. And so staff are now going to be given the direction that give us the full screening so we can make those determinations. That's one of the things that I'm really hoping will be a bit of a shift in the way new projects come before us, and that should have a sustainable, not sustainable, but it should have the duration, a cultural impact on the port into the future. So we're hopeful of that. And then there have been a couple of projects that I was like coming to the port, hopefully hoping to get done independent of all the things that came to us. And just back to Uber for a minute, they didn't want to have to comply with our environmental standards. So before I was even there's certain gas mileage you had to have. And so everybody's driving Priuses right now. And they said, well, look, we have, 10,000 drivers. We can't control, what kind of cars they drive. And I was saying, look, guys, in fact, one of the cool things about Uber is that all that, digital connection, the apps allow you to know who they are and where they are. And we said, come on, guys, if you can't do it, who could do it? And they are doing it. But, upon arrival, I've had folks trying to suggest that I don't want to support an environmental initiative that even predated me. So that was kind of, again, part of the learning curve. But, I wanted to get light rail connection to the airport. There's like that last quarter mile. And in fact, after, the commission and I were, done reminding the port staff that we wanted to have that better connectivity, because we don't want to just be, promoting, tires to the airport. The airport drive is a nightmare already. And so we had this connection that was, not conducive to a lot of traveling public, because it was like open air, a long walk, you have your bags. So now, right now, as we speak, that tunnel from between the parking garage and the terminal exit will be enclosed. We have, the golf carts will be running people back and forth, and it should be a really much nicer experience and reducing greenhouse gases, reducing drive congestion, giving people alternative ways. And every major airport, the mass transit connections to the airport are basic, and so we're going to make that better. So that was one I really said we should be doing, and there was already progress ahead. And then the other one's like for the Seaport. I didn't know why these trucks had to be going back and forth at rush hour. Why didn't we have gates that opened and closed later in the day, right? And then you just do business, just don't conflict. And in fact, this year we just started doing late gates, and so I see that as a significant way in which the port, we have to pay a little extra to do that, but the truckers only get paid per container they move. So if that congestion not only impacts us, it impacts these immigrant guys that are just getting by. So again, it was an environmental thing to do. It was the right thing for the communities, and it's the right thing for the drivers, and that sort of thing makes me happy when we can get to those kind of places. So ultimately, though, the port is not so much in the position to make money, but to make jobs. And so one of the funny things is, not so funny, that there are clearly livability challenges in the city. People can't make a living enough to afford the property. But at the same time, the port has jobs, not just the port, but the surrounding maritime community have jobs that they can't fill. There's a grain community. There's a whole, there's not this group of folks ready to fill the void that's going to be created by this aging population of folks. And so we're really trying to find ways to encourage that. So the port's having, giving grant programs, internships. We had like 100 interns. And in fact, I encourage people that are interested in that, they're paid internships. And we're giving out grants for, nonprofits to get tourism and other things like that. You go to the port website and look at tourism grants right now are available if you're a nonprofit. So we're trying to spawn as much sort of activity like that. The state doesn't have a statewide tourism promotion organization. The airport is like the vehicle of tourism in a lot of ways, gets you to the cruise ships and all that. So we are trying to take responsibility there. So I think that's a mouthful and a half. And so that's sort of where we've been for the most part. I was joking as a candidate, being a commissioner has to be easier than being a candidate. Being a candidate was harder than being a graduate student as far as I was concerned. I was, not fully expecting how much work it took. But I took it seriously, and I found myself in this lucky position and still wondering, was it the right career move? I'm being facetious. It's been fantastic, but it's that time management that I'm still working on. But it's not just being a commissioner. Once you're an elected official, you have to avail yourself to the public. So, people want to meet with you. You need to go where they are. So in addition to the commission meetings and the Seaport Alliance meetings and the briefings, you also are, in the public trying to hear directly. You don't want to be screened by your staff. We want to make sure that we have discretion to do things that staff doesn't have, but we got to know from the community that these things are happening. And, things like this cutting trees at the airport was probably the most controversial thing I ran into along the way. And I was going to say, look, I've been spared, some big debacle. But, the port is almost guaranteed to step into something over the course of a year. And, the way in which, there's a flight safety corridor, the planes, FAA requires planes to be able to have this unobstructed ability to land or take off. In case something went wrong, they want to clip a tree. And we have some trees here at the Northwest. And so it required a cut of substantial amount. That's like 2,000 trees. But 1,000 of them were going to be what DOT was going to cut for the 509, 167, freight corridor expansion. But, the public was just outraged. We're going to plan at 4-to-1 ratio, but they're not the same size trees. This is what the law required. But, the commission obviously felt the concerns of the community. So we set aside like $1 million to see what else can we do outside of the fence line of the airport. These are, again, impacted communities. We might be able to, line, their, boulevards, improving air quality, improving quality of life, given the fact that we recognize of our impact on the community. Again, staff can't do that. We can get to those sort of things. So next year there's a whole laundry list of stuff that are going to be coming down the pike. This airport master plan, and we have this whole new plan for a fisherman's terminal, which is a port asset as well. A lot of people don't know about. We had billboards on the Ballard Bridge that say food, gas, and lodging, turn left. Because it's like really a living, working museum that creates tons of jobs, doesn't create a lot of revenue for the port, but sustains the most of the North Pacific fishing fleet, which is among the most well-managed in the nation. So there are these, big master plans going on. We want to complete that light rail connection to the airport. I'm really particularly interested in looking at the trucker issue with greater detail. These folks are providing a key service, but like I said, I think there's a real social justice problem there in terms of how they can make a living. And the cabbies are in a similar situation. The whole new role of Uber and the companies are, really eating their lunch, and we want to make sure that everybody can sort of have their piece of the pie. But I want to see, plug-in stations at the how you say in English, the cell phone lot at the airport, greater electrification, all those shuttle buses from the parking lots and the parking garage and the hotels, they all have to be greened up. There's no way, they're running circles through the neighborhoods, and we require gas mileage requirements for the cabbies, but we have these, captive market of these trucks that would be very suitable for plug-ins or, alternative fuels. They're short rides. There's room to improve there, and we're going to deal with, whatever alternative arenas coming up and the implementation of this whole Energy Sustainability Committee. No shortage of stuff. And then there's the things that come to us, like I said, that we have no control over. So I think that gives you a kind of sense of the breadth and depth of things that go on at the port, and I still have to do other contracts as well.
So it seems like a natural extension of the work you've been doing for 30 years to finally end up at the port, because you have your finger on the pulse of what is happening and access to all the data.
Right. And, it's amazing that you can just ask instead of having to do freedom of information requests. When I first got there, I have, administrative support folks at the they're there to help. I've been, a sole consultant for a lot of years, and I had to get some used to that, oh my God, you're keeping a schedule. I never had a schedule quite as busy, but, the support staff have been remarkable. Unlike a lot of elected officials, though, you don't come with your own staff person. So we have, right now, 2 policy folks at the port to deal with 5 commissioners. We're going to hire up several more, but commissioners are technically half-time. So the presence in the office for a lot of the commissioners are, not as present. So the staffing situation is different than most, but we need certainly better support. We're going to have pilot projects for solar implementation. That's the other thing I was really excited about. The first solar installation is going to be on top of a net shed at Fisherman's Terminal, sort of see what it's like to do that. And if it works out well, we can, I'm hoping to get it on port headquarters, Pier 69, which would be sort of, I see it as symbolic as well as contribution. Jimmy Carter put, solar cells on top of the White House, and Reagan took them down. So I want to basically show the public this is mainstream.
As well as at SeaTac, potentially?
Yeah, SeaTac is, we're going to be building all this new terminal and all this a lot of roofs being done at SeaTac. And there was initially a lot of pushback about, reflectivity, make sure flight safety issues, obviously number one. Turns out there are other airports around the country that have figured it out. And we're definitely exploring that. It's, very few trees in the area. It's a very good exposure. So that's definitely, again, we're doing this pilot project, seeing how it pencils out for the broader area. Again, anything we can do that will reduce the community impacts and greenhouse gas and things like that, given that the airport is our biggest consumer, obviously. And then, there's a difference between what port-owned properties can do versus how we can encourage our tenants, which we don't really have direct control over. But if we put in the infrastructure for biofuels, Alaska Airlines is a partner in that effort, we can make things happen without actually regulating it.
So we only have a few minutes left. One of your concerns in your other life deals with the increase in shipping oil tankers on the Salish Sea, specifically with the increase from the pipelines that were just in November approved by Trudeau for the Kinder Morgan.
Right. So, in my other hat, I'm concerned about if we're going to be, new trade, we're going to do it responsibly. But Canada is going to look at a 7-fold increase in oil tanker traffic through the prime area of the killer whales, Harrow Strait Boundary Pass. This is going to have a significant increase in oil spill risk and no benefit. These ships are carrying diluted bitumen and tar sands that are the most difficult to clean up, if at all. And then they're jogging the border in terms of like how much authority do we have to manage that, and we need to have a much better dialogue with Canada. Again, having this port responsibility, helps me speak to my compatriots in Vancouver, and at the same time, it's not a conflict of interest. It's like doing this as the environmental candidate or commissioner is different than doing it on behalf of my clients. And people, elected me to advance these sort of things. So it's complicated, but I feel I'm not mixing my metaphors, so to speak. But, Canada is not it's not something I'm going to let go of. This is something that, they're our biggest competitors in one sense, but in the environment shouldn't be seen as a trade barrier. We should be able to play on we should win or lose based on, our trade issues, not on cutting around environmental corners.
Well, and wouldn't a spill up on the U.S.-Canadian border drastically affect Puget Sound in terms of fishing and wildlife? And
the environmental impacts would be extraordinary. The whole inland sea, it's not just going to go run out to the ocean. We will have bathtub rings around all those islands. Very easily take out the remnant population. We have our killer whales right now are down to 78, fewer than when we listed them under ESA a decade ago. So things are not going good. We have less fish, less whales, and but we have to take on more responsibility. So I'm hoping to make my little contribution to that end.
Talking with Fred Felleman, he is Commissioner at Port Seattle. How can people contact you and stay involved with issues at the port?
Well, that's really a good thing. I have a Facebook page just under my name, Fred Felleman. But, the port has this newsletter called Connections, and it's really one of the, friendlier ways of keeping track of the port. The Seaport Alliance also has a website, which for Currents, I think, is the one. And these are, I think they come out at least once a month, if not twice a month. It tells you when commission meetings are coming up, shows you what's on the agenda. At the same time, things that are going on around the port that I think most people are interested in but don't know are going on. So I really hope, it's free subscription, and check out my Facebook page. And if you got a problem, let me know through the Port of Seattle Commission office, and we'll schedule something up.
All right. Well, unfortunately, with that, we are out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming in again and spending time with us.
Thanks again for the opportunity. Look forward to doing it again.